Tim.
Hello. Hi,
Hey.
Ron.
Hey.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Very well. And you?
Good. Well, it's nice to talk again. So let me introduce myself first. I'm Ron Friedmann. I am between jobs. I blog at Strategic Legal Technology located at Prism Legal. And my guest today in Litera TV is Tim Follett. Tim, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background before I jump in? Well, let me just say that you and I met recently. I had learned about StructureFlow, the company you started, from some tweets, and I've long been a fan of visual presentation of information. So we talked, I wrote a blog post, and here we are to go over that and some more. So what's your background that you are doing this and starting a company?
Fantastic. Yeah, no, thanks very much, Ron. It's great to be talking again to you. So I'm a corporate lawyer by background. I was a lawyer in London.
Hold on, sorry, Tim, I'm getting some feedback. I'm wondering if that's, or just some static on my end. I'm gonna do something risky on live TV. I'm taking out my headset and coming from here.
Okay.
Start again.
Can you hear me okay now?
This is better, so it might have just been my equipment.
Okay, fantastic. It's tricky, isn't it, with all this technology? Things can go wrong. I'm a lawyer by background. I was a corporate and commercial lawyer practicing in London for around 10 years. I started off my career at Slaughter and May, which is one of the big city law firms in London. And I was doing a mixture of M&A and investment and structuring work. And then I changed tack slightly. I went into a slightly different firm. I went to Farrow & Co., which is more of a private client firm historically. And I was still doing a lot of corporate work, but more with a kind of private client focus. And then about 2.5 years ago now, I left practice to set up StructureFlow. I've been having a great time with building this company, developing a product which is now going out to market, and very excited about what the next year or two has in store for us.
So I think to help the audience understand what you're doing and why, if you can show a screenshot of what you've done, and then that will help frame the discussion.
Sure. So I will share my screen. Can you see that, Ron?
Well, I see a notice saying yeah, there we go. Yes.
There we go. Okay, fantastic. So what you guys are looking at now is the main interface in StructureFlow. We've got a private equity type structure on the screen at the moment. And what we've built with StructureFlow is a piece of software which is for smart visual structuring. So the idea is that you're able to create complex deal diagrams and structure diagrams in this software very quickly, a lot quicker than you can do in PowerPoint or Visio. And this diagram has behind it a data layer. And so every single object that you can see on the canvas at the moment, these companies, contracts, flows, funding flows, etc., has a data dimension to it as well. And the system understands what the objects are, and it understands what the relationships are between them, and that gives an intelligence to the diagram and to the software.
Great. Well, let's step back a minute, and I think folks have had a long enough time, and I think it'll be more dynamic if you stop sharing your screen.
Sure.
And what I was going to go is now spool back now that the audience understands what we're talking about. So I've been intrigued, because we talked in the past, I wrote an article in, I think, 1992 called Practicing Law with Pictures, and
had various visual displays in there, which were unusual then and sadly are unusual today in the practice of law. And I remember I had one that was a diagram of a transaction, and the associate, the 6-year associate who shared it with me said, I didn't really understand the transaction until I had this diagram done. At that time, the tools to do it on your own were hard. So someone, a professional did it. But I've long wondered why is it taking so long to get to a product like this, and why hasn't there been demand? It seems to me the natural way to understand a large transaction.
I think you're right, Ron. It's a very natural way to understand a large, complicated transaction. And I think fundamentally the reason for that is that a picture speaks 1,000 words. These transactions and these structures are fundamentally about things and relationships between things. And the diagram is extremely well suited to conveying that information rapidly through essentially shapes and lines. I think that the reason why it's taken so long to get to the point where we've got a product like StructureFlow coming to the market is that I think there are a number of factors. I think, first of all, I think maybe the legal community has been happy using the sort of the traditional Office, Microsoft Office toolkit. I think we've seen that with Word, which is kind of like a Swiss Army knife of lawyers. It's been used for not just for writing contracts, but also creating tables to track deals. Historically, I think there's been an aversion to even Excel, and PowerPoint has been the go-to piece of software to create structure diagrams. But I think the community, the legal profession, is beginning to realise that actually we're kind of at the point where that kind of first generation tooling has served its purpose, but now actually they're looking for tools which are a little bit more tailored, a little bit more bespoke, a little bit more powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I've done quite a few PowerPoint presentations in my years of experience. I've also recently, in the last 3 or 4 years, learned Google Slides, and the idea of trying to create the diagram you shared earlier on screen would be appalling, right? I mean, it's not that it would be impossible, but it would take hours, and then as you realize, oh, I didn't leave room on the bottom of the screen or the side of the screen, good luck resizing everything. And I rate myself as at least advanced intermediate in PowerPoint. So
yeah,
I'm with you. We'll talk a little bit more about the data layer behind it and the vision there, because I've long, I mean, if I think of this as deals as a set of contracts, I've long thought of contracts as really being a database record or multiple database records or XML or JSON, choose your choice. And it's really more about the data than the language. And so do we start seeing some bridging of the gap here?
Completely. I mean, when you create a diagram in PowerPoint, if that's a structure diagram that you create in PowerPoint, if you boil it down to what's actually going on, you are visualizing an underlying data set. In order to, if you're doing a piece of due diligence, for example, and you're mapping out a structure that maybe you're acting for an acquirer of the business, for example, and you're mapping that structure out and you're creating a diagram that might go at the front of a due diligence report, for example, you're probably looking through a lot of underlying documentation that's sitting in a data room. You're sifting through it. You're trying to work out what are the entities, what are the relationships between them, what are the percentage holdings, where are they incorporated, all of that information. And that fundamentally is an act of visualization of underlying data. And our view is that you need to get a kind of two-way interface between the underlying data and the diagram. So if something changes in the underlying data, the diagram can change. Or if you want a diagram that is fit for one purpose but not for another, maybe you toggle on and off what you show in that diagram at the data level. So there's this interplay there that we're trying to achieve, And I think, once you achieve that, because effectively what you're doing by building these structures up is you're structuring data. When you create a diagram in StructureFlow, the system understands what you've brought into the project, what you've put on the canvas. It understands what the relationships are between the various elements. And then that opens up really exciting, interesting possibilities around potentially querying that data and applying logics to that data, but through a kind of visual interface.
So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, how many generations future in the product would we have to be before you could create a linkage where if you insert a new party or you change the language, that it all stays, that the visual layer and the data layer and the language layer all stay in sync? That seems to me, the Holy Grail, and like the Holy Grail, hard to achieve.
Yes, I mean, we're not far off it. I mean, there are different levels to that, but the idea of being able to kind of toggle things off and on, the idea of being able to perhaps through a sequence of diagrams have the system understand that this is the same entity across the different steps in a steps paper, for example. We're very close. And then, beyond that, I think this data concept has a lot of, potentially very exciting possibilities around pushing and pulling data, with other systems, other tooling, deal management platforms, document management systems.
Let's pursue that. So, and I love the expression tooling, and I don't know if I just haven't heard that. I'm not sure if that's more of a British English than American English, but
yeah,
you
got to have the right tool for the job, right?
Exactly.
And this I think is the problem.
So let's talk about that. So our hosts,
the tools need sharpening.
Right. Our hosts, Litera, have a very nice product, formerly known as Doxley, now Litera Transact, a deal management platform. They have competitors. Are you competing with them, or complementary, or other?
So we wouldn't see ourselves as competing with a deal management platform. That has a particular utility and I think a particular space in the toolkit. But what we would like to think is that we can complement that tooling by introducing a visual layer into the mix, and to connect into a Transact project. I just showed you that private equity example, StructureFlow project. You may have seen, there were some contracts in there, and those contracts will track through to CPs. That there may be CPs relevant on a financing.
You should say CP is for the audience.
Conditions precedents. So things that need to happen before you close a deal. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that information is structural. It relates back to an underlying structure. A platform like Transact, I've got some familiarity with it. It fundamentally has a tabular interface, and necessarily so, and it will trace its genesis, if you like, back probably to very long tables in a landscape Word document that would then be passed backwards and forwards. I did it when I was in practice.
And you have an objection to very long Word tables? Just kidding.
I know. I mean, it's it goes to this. I think again, it goes to this point, doesn't it? Around just the tooling becoming, it's just getting sharpened. It's just becoming more intelligent.
I'd like to continue for a minute. There are two other toolings that I think would be helpful to integrate with. So if you can address document management, especially, even before the COVID crisis, most firms have licensed an enterprise document management system. So the common brands being NetDocuments and iManage. I think usage will go up between GDPR and privacy, least privilege security, et cetera. one of the challenges has been lack of use. But now as we use that, as lawyers and firms use those tools more and more, do you integrate or will you integrate with them?
Certainly. I mean, we'd love to. I think we're just getting to the point now where you sort of commercially, those opportunities are becoming more attainable. We're beginning to build up a body of relationships with other vendors. And certainly, I'd love to integrate with as much tooling out there as possible.
Right, because I could see in the data layer that if you click through in an object, you'd want to see the documents and actually click through to the current version. For some certain purposes, you might even want to go back to prior versions or the first version if you're in the midst of negotiations. Well, good, I'm glad to hear that. The other, what especially when I think about the diagram, I'm fond of the whole category of firm intelligence, experience management platforms, which have really taken off in law firms in the last decade. Some firms invest products in that, by way of example, our foundation software, in-depth experience. I can see where especially firms invest in writing meta narratives as they do, that if you have a complex transaction, and if I'm a lawyer, especially if I'm a lawyer looking at it, I'd love to see that rather than read a narrative, or worse, having to read a bunch of deal docs. And to make sense. Comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, when you're if you're a law firm, you're starting a new project. That information about that project, right from inception, perhaps when you're gathering information about this project, that information should be packaged up and tagged and stored in a granular way, such that it can be deployed usefully in a number of different use contexts, right? There's a journey that happens, isn't there, with these transactions from the outset, where it's inception of the matter, and you're populating information, potentially in a kind of matter management tool. But some of that information is going to be structural. And if you can take that information that is structural and then feed it into StructureFlow, so you've got a simple M&A deal, and you need to know, for the purposes of filling out the matter inception form, you need to know, okay, who's the buyer, who's the seller, what's the target company, what are the subsidiaries that are being sold. For your KYC, you need to know who the entities are that sit above your instructing entity. All of that information is there. And if you can store it in some way and then feed it into tooling like StructureFlow or Transact or whatever else it is.
I mean, there are firms either using the products I mentioned or proprietary software. They're capturing over 100 data points in a deal database, so that would fit. Well, we've sufficiently geeked out. Let's step back to the business front. If I think hard about first seeing your StructureFlow in print, it was I think it was an article or a tweet that you were part of the Incubator Program at Slaughter May. What is that program briefly, and how is it to be part of it?
Sure. So Collaborate is the program. It was Slaughter May's first year of running it. We were very lucky to be picked and to go on it. It's a relatively short program. It ran over the early part of the summer last year, 3 months or so. As part of it, you were able to get really good access to their lawyers. So we had a number of workshops with lawyers in different teams, corporate, banking, disputes, real estate even. And that was a really enriching experience in terms of helping with our product thinking and our product development. They also had a number of other sessions that that were more kind of targeted around kind of the business side and pitching, for example. I got a lot of help on my pitching.
Pitching for investors or customers or both?
A bit of both. Yeah, a bit of both. But it culminated. There was a demo day. Kind of pitching event at the end of the program, where the various different companies that were part of it got up on stage and pitched their product. Basically what it is, why it's important. and that was that was a very helpful experience. And there's some great people at Slaughter and May, running that program. Jane Stewart, Emma Walton. They've postponed it at the moment for this year because of COVID, but I'm sure it will be back up and running soon.
I'm excited. Just as an editorial comment, I think there are more incubator accelerated programs like that in the UK than the US, at least proportionately, and perhaps even on an absolute basis. So I think that what you said, talking to my friends across legal tech companies, both pretty new startups and older ones, that access to lawyers is key, really, in seeing how they work and how they react. Yeah. Well, so you had a good grounding forward to today. What's been the uptake? What kind of reception are you getting, either both among customers and prospects?
Yeah, I mean, we've really just got going. We had our first pilot start in November last year, and off the back of that, we've just got to the point where we've got one firm, big international firm, which has taken its first full license. We got another big international firm that is at a contract negotiation stage with us, and then sitting behind that, 5 or so firms in pilot. We've been focusing to date on the law firm side of things, but we're also now beginning to get some good interest and traction with in-house legal teams as well.
And how about among investment bankers or private equity funds? Would you be selling to deal makers or their law departments or other?
Completely, yeah. So we've had quite a lot of interest in the private equity space and the asset management space, and in particular in the real estate sector, where you as you probably know, you've got some quite complicated investment fund structures which are holding underlying real estate assets. So we've had a lot of interest in that space. Even to the point where you have some people that are looking at us and they see not just legal tech, they see prop tech. So that's obviously fantastic for us. I think where we want to get to is.
I've lost you.
Well, can you hear me?
You're coming back.
Just bear with me.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, you're there.
Slightly too wild a hand movement there. Managed to knock out the audio.
I'm just going to fall back on stereotypes. What can I say? The British are not. You're not New Yorkers. You're not supposed to just gesticulate wildly.
I know. Slightly embarrassing. But
so they were the private equity funds. They were. Viewed it's almost like this is property technology.
Exactly.
Good. Well, what I've been on all sides of the equation in the legal market, buying, selling, advising. What are some of the objections you're hearing? Because that's always interesting from both a sales perspective, but also customers who might think about this or law firms who might think about it. What do you hear when you're presenting this? Like, oh, I never use this because whatever.
Yeah, so we hear a few different flavors, if you like. First is probably, we don't do a lot of diagramming. And then, that immediately elicits really, are you sure you don't do any diagramming? Because in my experience, if you walk around a floor full of lawyers, you see diagrams on, whiteboards, or just people at their desk, just jotting diagrams down or pinning them to the wall, by their monitor. So we see a lot of that, and then I think we have to explore. We have to say, really, are you sure? Have you asked? And we tend to get it from non-lawyers. We tend to get it a lot from non-lawyers, maybe people that are in a kind of IT function or an innovation function, but they don't come from a legal background. Maybe they come from a management consulting background. So we hear that a fair amount, and I often feel like saying, okay, well, if you're seriously not doing diagrams, then you should be, because you will be better lawyers for it.
Well, I mean, if I'm going to put my cynical hat on, which is not all that hard for me, frankly, is I can imagine someone saying, Tim, if I had wanted to be an artist, I would have gone to art school.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's, I think there's an artist inside you, Ron.
Well said.
And I think lawyers, I think fundamentally they do think visually. It's just they express themselves in words currently. I mean, if you talk to a corporate or banking lawyer, and they'll talk about top codes, mid codes, subs. They'll talk about funding coming in at this level and then going out at this level here. They talk waterfalls. They talk in visual metaphor, right? I mean, the whole system is visual. Well, actually,
there's been. I don't know if I've been interested in this. Saying academic would be overstating, but when I read articles, we think visually. I wasn't necessarily planning to do this, but some people may recognize this is one of two Edward Tufte books I have. This one's called Envisioning Information. The other is The Visual Display of Quantitative Data. These are books I acquired literally 30 years ago. And what's remarkable to me is, what you say is really insightful, that we talk in visual terms. And there's a lot of evidence that the brain, something like, I can't remember what the numbers, like 80% of the neurons or information we take, assuming we have okay vision, comes to us that way. Clearly there's substitutes for people who are impaired, but if you're not, that's how we take in a lot of information. And the
completely.
Whole Blink, Malcolm Gladwell.
Love that book.
Yeah.
Completely. I think that if what's going on is, like, when you have visual intake of information, it all hits you at once, right? Whereas if you have to read some text, it's incremental. You build up the picture one word at a time, one sentence at a time, and it's very easy to get lost. So that diagram that I showed you at the start, if I tried to explain that in words, right, it would take a very long time, and you get lost quite quickly. And I think you see that in court, in cases, like if you ever read a law case, in the recitals at the front, they're trying to explain what's going on, and you end up with paragraphs and paragraphs of explanatory text about basically what the structure is. And you read that and you think, and if I was reading it, what I tend to do is actually draw a diagram next to me, right, and then make sure that I'm getting. So I'd say, well, when do we get to the point where the law courts are happy to stick a diagram in a case?
And I'm just going to editorialize for a moment to say, if there are litigators or regulatory lawyers listening in, they are not safe from diagramming either, because if they're litigators, they should be using decision tree analysis, litigation risk analysis with decision trees. That would be for them. And for the regulatory ones, it really depends on the practice, but there's lots of opportunity there. So any comments on visual displays more generally in the practice of law beyond what I said?
Well, I think you've mentioned some great examples there. Decision trees, logic flows, dashboard type visualizations of information. Due diligence, I'm a corporate bod by background, due diligence reports, which are infographic in terms of the presentation. There's smart, visual contracts. If the context is right, or bringing visual information into contracts, even if it's as schedules or appendices, even if they don't have legal force, they're specifically not given legal force, but they're given kind of explanatory function.
In any healthy business relationship, people are going to try and say, well, what did we have in mind when we negotiated this? Let's look at the pictures and go discuss from there, right? That's the business way of thinking about it. Unfortunately, many lawyers don't think that. And I see we're almost out of time. So any final words of wisdom about visuals in law or diagramming transactions?
Words of wisdom. I would just like to see a world in 2-3 years' time where there is more use of diagrammatic tooling to be able to think and communicate and collaborate more visually. I think the legal world is going to be a better place for it. I think you're going to have better lawyers. I think you're going to have happier clients. And I think StructureFlow is part of this step towards that.
I agree, and I'm in the habit not of promoting specific products, but the first product I found this, and I got excited because it reminded me when I was a consultant for 3 years at Bain & Company, we only did visual displays. There were no written reports. I'm not saying lawyers will get there, but we need to move a little bit away from the text. So this is
completely
a step. Well, Tim, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I hope to see StructureFlow more and more. And for our audience, thank you. And I hope in the US, we have a 3-day weekend coming up, Memorial Day, UK statutory holiday Monday.
We do, yeah. So it's a long weekend.
Good. So I wish everyone a long weekend and stay healthy.
Yeah. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.